belief, and it's a deeply embedded belief in the recording world that expensive outboard gear is the difference between amateur recordings and professional recordings. I'm gonna challenge that today, because after 40 years of professional sessions in a studio that has been featured in Mix magazine, I've learned where premium matters and where you're just paying for a logo. I've been running Brownstone Recording Studio for over 30 years. I've produced records across multiple genres using both expensive gear as well as the budget stuff, and sometimes on the same record. And here's the honest truth. The gear that made a difference in my sessions wasn't always the gear that cost the most. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about why does the overpaying trap happen? That is by design. Second, I'm going to share 3 specific categories that I feel people are wasting money in outboard gear for a smaller home studio. And third, we're going to talk about 3 questions that I ask myself before I spend $1 on an expensive piece of outboard hardware. So let's get into it. Now, I want to be clear about something before we begin. I am not anti-outboard gear. I love this stuff, and some of my most cherished pieces I've had for over 30 years. But there's a difference between buying gear because it solves a specific problem and buying gear because you saw a YouTube video. One moves your recordings forward, and the other one moves money out of your bank account. So let's talk about why this happens. Let's talk about the first culprit, YouTube. And I say this as a person who makes YouTube videos, so I'm not disparaging YouTube at all. YouTube has built an entire economy around gear worship. You watch a video, the presenter pulls the gear out of the box, plugs it in, plays a clip, and you think that that's the missing piece. But here's what you didn't see. You didn't see the room that it was recorded in. You didn't see the microphone placement. You didn't see the hours of editing it took just to make that demo clip. So the gear looks like the variable, but it almost never is the variable. Also, the algorithm rewards these videos. Gear videos get clicks, they get comments, and they move products for the manufacturer. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not pointing fingers. I just want you to understand how this works. The second culprit here is brand name premiums, and this one goes a little deep. There are pieces of outboard gear with legendary names attached to them. They've been on countless hit records for the last 50 some odd years, and like I said, the legacy is real, and I'm not dismissing that. But here's the thing. I've done sessions where I've used legendary pieces and a boutique piece on the same source at the same time in the same room, and guess which one won? Neither, because talent and musicianship determine the performance, not the gear. Now, does that mean that the expensive mic pre isn't better? No. What it means is these are just tools. You will sound like yourself as a musician on a $100 mic pre, and you will sound like yourself in a $1,000 mic pre. The expensive mic pre charges a premium for the history, for the legacy, and for the fact that some engineers some time ago used it on a hit record. And think about this for a minute. The average consumer has no idea what mic pre you recorded your performance on. Neither do they care. Let that sink in for a minute. And the third culprit, I say this with love because I'm guilty of it as well, is gas. Gear acquisition syndrome. You know what that is. You're in a forum, It's midnight and somebody posts a particular thread about a shootout. Someone else posts a thread about how a particular compressor has transformed their low end. That thread has 200 replies, everybody has an opinion. And suddenly you open a browser tab, you navigate to Reverb with your credit card in hand. You see, gas is emotional purchasing. And emotional purchasing decisions made at midnight on a forum are almost never the same decision you would make with a client session open, asking yourself, what actually does this track need? And forums are full of passionate people. But the problem with passion is that it and objectivity almost never reside in the same space. And the gear industry knows this. There's a language to it. Goes a little like this. Oh, it's a limited run. These are vintage reissues. This is your last chance to own one. The language is not an accident, so you should be aware. Preamps, compressors, and converters. These are the three categories where I see engineers spend the most money and get the least return. So let's talk about where the premium is real and where it isn't, because the answer isn't the same across all three. Here's the honest truth about preamps. The colored versus transparent debate is real. It's not marketing hype. A Neve style preamp with its transformer saturation is going to genuinely sound different from a clean, ruler, flat, transparent type pre. That's physics, it's not opinion. But, and this is the part that people don't put in their videos, the question isn't which preamp sounds better. The question is, what preamp sounds best on the source that you're trying to record? Because if you record your vocalist in an untreated room with the best condenser microphone running through the most expensive preamp, you will still spend more time correcting room problems in the mix as opposed to appreciating the character of the pre chosen for them. So here's the thing. I've recorded on low-cost mic preamps and expensive ones. And I'll tell you what I tell every engineer. A great performance going through a $400 mic preamp will beat out a mediocre performance in a $4,000 mic preamp any day of the week. So before you go and drop 4 figures on a mic pre, ask yourself this question. Is the level of work I'm doing able to justify this expense? And if the answer is no, then just hold off for a minute. Compressors. This is going to get a bit touchy and make a few of you uncomfortable. We are in 2026 and plug-in emulations by Waves and SSL are spot on. But what does a hardware compressor give you that a plug-in doesn't? A few things. True analog circuitry that responds to voltages and transients, harmonic content that gets introduced at the transformer stage, and a tactile workflow. Now, the last one might not matter to you, but there is something about physically reaching out and turning a knob that forces the creative decision making in the moment. So is it worth spending money on a hardware unit over a plugin? For most beginners, the answer to that is no. But if you want to introduce hardware into your workflow, I did a video on where you might want to start and I'll link it in the description below. And here's one that almost no one is talking about, and the one that might be costing you more than everything in your entire signal chain. Your converters. Your analog to digital and digital to analog converters are the bridge between the physical sound and your DAW. Let me paint a common picture that happens amongst us. An engineer will spend $1,000 on a Neve mic pre and plug that same mic pre into a $200 interface. That's like putting high-octane gasoline in an old beat-up car. It does not make sense. The converter is the last thing your sound touches on the way in and the first thing your sound touches on the way out. Every dollar you spend on a mic and a preamp has to survive the conversion stage. And budget converters, they color the sound, they introduce jitter, and you lose low-end clarity. The reason why no one is talking about this topic is because it's highly misunderstood, and therefore the whole subject matter is just disregarded. But I promise you this, if you ever wondered why your mixes aren't translating, or why your stereo image seems crowded and smeared, check your converters. It might be the best investment you could make in your studio over any hardware piece you could buy. I want to give you some practical advice, because knowing the traps is half the work. The other half is having a clear way of thinking through each and every purchase you're about to make. And over the years, I've gotten it down to 3 basic questions that I ask myself, and I don't buy anything until I can honestly answer all 3. So let's go through them. Question number 1. Will this fix a specific problem in my studio, or am I just buying hope? This is an important question, and it's the hardest one that you can answer honestly, but here's how I test it. I name the problem out loud before I buy the gear. Simply saying, I want my recordings to sound more professional is not identifying a problem. Saying something like, this dynamic mic does not have enough top end for my vocal is an example of identifying a problem. Now we could talk about a specific microphone that will address this problem. So in other words, if you can't name the problem, then you're just buying hope. And hope can be an expensive thing at $3,000 per unit. Question 2, can I actually hear a difference in a blind test? Here's a discipline that I've applied to all of my purchasing through the years. If I can't hear an immediate difference, or if I can't tell you which is which in a blind test, then maybe it's not a worthwhile purchase. Now, I'm not saying do a formal blind test for every time you consider a purchase. That's not realistic. What I am saying is this. Before you spend money, try and find a way to hear the unit in context with work that you're doing. This is where the 30-day return policy comes in handy. You get a chance to use the unit in a real session on real material, letting your ears be the judge. If the difference in sound is obvious, that's useful information. And if it's not obvious, that's useful also. And you saved yourself a ton of money. Question number 3. This one has saved me more money and is likely to break your heart. And that question is, what else could this money do for my recordings? Not for my rack, not for my gear list, for my actual recordings. And if the answer is nothing at all, just don't spend the money. Listen, buying gear is seductive. You can see it, you can touch it, it looks real nice, but more often than not, that money is better spent somewhere else in your studio, like room treatment. So that's the whole thing. Know the traps, run the framework, and spend money where it actually matters. And if this information was helpful in any way or saved you from making a mistake, please do me a favor. Hit the like button and in the comments below, tell me which one of these traps you've fallen into. And until the next one, peace.